Assault rifles in Helldivers 2 are fully automatic weapons that pump bullets into Liberty's enemies. They tend to have good handling and a fast fire rate, along with some recoil. For the most part, these have been seen as a middle-of-the-road weapon category in this game, able to carry its own but not overly powerful. But now we have modifications, various attachments you can put on each of your guns to improve or change the way they behave. In many respects, this really does change the game, and that all begs the question, which of these assault rifles are the best and which are the worst for taking out on the battlefield? Dr. Pooplove here, and that's what I hope to find out. In this video, I have grinded to max level for every assault rifle primary and ranked them on a tier list, with S being the best and Poop Hater being the worst. But not just one tier list, 3 tier lists, because these assault rifles are going to vary wildly depending on whether you are facing off against the Terminids, the Automatons, or the Illuminate. Starting with the AR-23 Liberator, which is the base starter gun in this game, a highly accurate assault rifle with a fast fire rate and decent recoil. It also has decent ergonomics, essentially your weapon's handling or how quickly you can aim your weapon to your target. And its default capacity is 45. But much of these stats can actually be modified. And when you do modify this, it can be absolutely beautiful. Generally, I like to modify this with iron sights for my scope, which increases your ergonomics for the expense of no real scope, but I mostly play in third-person view, so that doesn't really affect me too much. I use a vertical foregrip to reduce my recoil, and for the muzzle, I go for the flash hider, which reduces my recoil even further, but doesn't hit my horizontal recoil. You can opt for the compensator to really help with that vertical recoil, but that will impact your horizontal recoil, making it a little bit less controllable. You see, with vertical recoil, you know your weapons are going to always go up. With horizontal, your bullets can go left or right, and ironically, it's hard to compensate for that. Both the flash hider and the compensator are decently good though. It's really just down to your personal choice. But finally, the biggest game changer here is the drum magazine, giving you 60 bullets per mag for the trade-off of less mags and slower reloading. But if you want to mitigate that, a great thing to have is the siege-ready armor, which will add mags back into your arsenal, as well as increase your reload speed. Now, as we take this out on the bug front, this feels pretty good. With a decently high damage and that extra capacity means you can take out a good number of enemies in one single mag, and that feels really nice. You can also take out the bile spewers in one mag, which is pretty awesome. While these modifications do impact the ergonomics and make them a little bit more sluggish, I didn't find the difference to negatively impact me too much, and I can still snap to targets decently fast. There are some downsides to this weapon though. The light armor penetration makes this not ideal for hive guards and bile spewers armor, and there is minimal stagger force on this, which means this can struggle versus some of the more aggressive bugs. I felt like generally I was able to take out predator stalkers decently well with this thing, but only as long as I got the jump on them. If they get the jump on you though, it's a bit of a different story. The damage on this feels pretty good. It did get a number of buffs and I feel like it feels pretty strong. Overall, this is good and the modifications really do help this one. So instead of what I used to see as a B on the bug front, I will actually give this a low A for the bugs. Now for the bots, this also feels surprisingly pretty decent as well. I really only make one tweak to my modifications, and that is that I like to add the reflex scope just because I tend to like to use first person more on this front, as you do have a bit more of ranged combat. Now, the extra damage buffs that this has received means that you are taking these guys out a little quicker, and this especially feels good versus the berserkers. The added capacity means you can take out more enemies before needing to reload, and that's pretty nice. Of course though, this is only light armor penetrating, which means inherently it will struggle on a front which has many medium armor and higher enemies. But as most bots have some light armor weak spots, having this gun be as accurate as it is and easy to handle does make it easier to get on track. Still though, it's hard to give this glowing remarks in this front, and the modifications don't feel quite as impactful. It's good enough to have some impact, and for all that, I'll give it a B for the bots. Now for the squids, this is going to be pretty useful. I modify this the same as I do for the bugs, and doing so yields me some great results. Assault rifles on this front tend to be very strong because of all the shields, which often need sustained fire in order to take them down quickly, as well as the voteless horde, which assault rifles are pretty nice for mowing these guys down. The Liberator does both of these things nicely, and especially with the drum magazine and its higher damage, you can just wreck a lot of these guys. For the tankier enemies like the flesh mobs, it can take them out in roughly 2 mags with the drum magazine on, but you do need to be hitting like all your shots. That isn't so great, but there aren't really many options that are great for these guys, so you're really just better off getting this guy weak with something else and then using this to finish him off. For the Overseers, this can also take them out pretty decently from the body, and it will be a little bit more effective if you reduce that horizontal recoil with something like the Flash Hider so that you're a little more accurate. This will not work for the Stingrays who need medium armor penetration to impact them. This is pretty nice. Definitely not the best, but a good solid option for this front. I will give it an A for the squids. But next up is another one in the Liberator family. We have the AR-23P Liberator Penetrator, which is a medium armor penetrating variant of the base Liberator with the trade-off of less damage. As far as modifications go, I mostly mimic the same settings as with the base Liberator: iron sights, a vertical grip, and a drum magazine. But this time I go with the muzzle brake so that I can keep my horizontal recoil as low as possible. I feel like the vertical recoil on this gun was never actually that bad, so while you can definitely get it lower, I don't think that's totally necessary, but of course it's up to you. Now versus the bugs, this feels decent. The main struggle with this on the bug front is the lower damage, which isn't horrible, but does leave you fighting some of the tankier enemies longer, leaving you more at risk to danger. As a result, it often doesn't feel better than the base Liberator. The medium armor penetration is nice to have, especially versus the hive guards and the bile spewers, but the damage trade-off here is not really worth it, as it feels like it takes a bit too long to kill most of the other things, which frankly I find to be more dangerous than the medium armor enemies. Also, this doesn't have the best stagger force, which can make it tough, especially versus the stalkers. That being said, this still feels decent, and having a drum magazine is definitely a huge plus, so I will give this a low B for the bugs. Now for the bots, this actually feels amazing. The only modification change I would do is add a scope of your preference, and you will find yourself just wrecking bots on this front. And with the drum magazine, you can take out multiple of these guys in a single mag, which feels great. Since this is medium armor penetrating, you don't have to go for the light armor weak spots on these guys, and that makes them so much easier to kill. This does have a little bit of that lower damage though, but it still feels pretty good, and it's nice that you can reduce the recoil even further with things like the vertical grip, giving you even more ability at range. This is a super solid pick on this front, so it gets a high A from me for the bots. Now for the squids, this also feels decent. The drum magazine can be useful in laying down suppressive fire versus the voteless, and helps with the shields as well. The damage being lowered isn't felt that much against the voteless, but it definitely hurts this against the flesh mob, as you are going to have to dip into about 3 mags if you are trying to solely use this. But since this is medium armor penetrating, it can actually kill a stingray as well as a harvester from the joints, which is pretty nice, and the lower recoil allows you to do so without as much hassle. It also is nice that you can headshot overseers with this because their helmets have medium armor. This is pretty useful, I like it, and so I'll give it an A for the squids. But next, we have the AR-23C Liberator Concussive, another variant of the base Liberator, but this time with a slower fire rate, lower damage, and concussive rounds that stagger enemies backwards. Now, to be honest, as far as mods go, there isn't much you can do to improve this. The iron sights help your ergonomics, and the vertical grip reduces your recoil. But there is no muzzle attachment here, and the drum magazine is on by default, so I would just stick to that. And by the way, this guy has some ridiculous horizontal recoil that you unfortunately cannot improve. Despite all of that, I still quite like this for the bugs. The main benefit here is the very strong concussive rounds, which stagger the enemy's back and keep them off your back. Perhaps during some normal missions, this aspect is not as critical as just pure hard-hitting damage, but when it comes to facing off against the dangerous and aggressive predator strain of enemies, you can really start to see how good this is. As more and more enemies try to swarm you, a single bullet with this thing can hold them back, including the stalkers, which can otherwise be really annoying to deal with. The drum magazine also is great, allowing you to keep enemies back for a while and feel safe safe without having to worry too much about reloading. Now, yes, the damage on this is a bit lower, but it did receive a faster fire rate buff, which helps a little bit, and having control over the horde with the stagger allows you to make better use of other items, like the incendiary grenade, as you can push enemies into the flame, or even with something like a dog by your side to dish out additional damage for you. Ultimately, I like this a lot, and I appreciate how much this makes you pretty untouchable and safe on even the most dangerous of missions. I'm giving this an A for the bugs. Now, moving on to the bots, where the stagger can be good, but it's just less effective. This does do well versus the berserkers and shielded devastators, being able to stagger them back, as well as being able to stop rocket devastators from their attacks. This can be some sort of a dedicated attack suppressor, but being light armor penetrating means these shots need to be pretty precise, and that can actually be quite hard with that horizontal recoil, which tends to throw you off. And even though the damage and fire rate has been improved over time, I very much would prefer to just eliminate these bots quicker, as sure, some stagger force can help, but often you just leave yourself open to others. It's not the best, so this gets a C for the bots. Now, for the squids, I'm also just not impressed at all. Stagger can help with the voteless, but since they are already so weak, that aspect feels quite unnecessary and really just a waste of time. And while this can somewhat stagger a flesh mob, if it happens to be in its charge mode, there's nothing that can stop this big boy when he barrels towards you. It's also pretty bad for the shields because of that slower fire rate, just making it take so long compared to the other assault rifles. And being light armor penetrating means it's not going to help you with things like the harvesters or the stingrays. Perhaps the best use case for this is versus any overseers, as the stagger can keep them back and stop them for a bit. Although what's annoying is when it pushes the elevated overseers back, it kind of just helps them in being even harder to hit and take down. Another problem though is even if you are staggering some of these guys, you got others shooting pot shots at you from behind, which just doesn't make this worth it. To me, this is largely ineffective here, and if anything, a little bit counterproductive, so I'm going to give this a poop-hater for the squids. But now let's switch gears a little bit. We have our first non-Liberator assault rifle, the StA-52 assault rifle, which is a kill zone themed weapon that you actually have to buy from the superstore for over 600 super credits, which is very high. This gun does the same damage as the base Liberator, but it has a default drum magazine and a higher fire rate, traded off for a little bit of a higher recoil. Now, unfortunately, this cannot be modified, which is quite the bummer. I kind of get it because this was designed specifically to act like a gun from Killzone, but not being able to modify this at all puts this at quite a disadvantage versus a lot of the other assault rifles. For the bugs, the main advantage this used to have over the base Liberator is its drum magazine, but now that the Liberator can have an even bigger one, this starts to feel a bit pointless to take out. This also only has iron sights as an option, and while that doesn't really impact me too much, it certainly would be nice if you could at least change it. It also has its recoil, which is higher than the base Liberator, putting it at yet another disadvantage. One potential plus is it does seem like this has some decent ergonomics, so that might be another reason to take this, although you probably can modify your base Liberator to feel about the same. Overall, this has really lost any wow factor that it had, and it feels pretty bad by comparison. It can still do some damage, but it's just not special anymore. I'm going to give this a C for the bugs. And this is also not so hot on the bot front, where light armor penetrating weapons are always at a disadvantage. But because of the iron sights, using first person view on this becomes even harder to use at range than its close Liberator counterpart. And it also has worse recoil. I don't see any reason to take this out on this front, especially with much better assault rifle options. So yeah, this is going to get a poop hater for me. And for the squids, I also am not a fan. The recoil is so noticeable now that other guns can have theirs modded down, and the slightly lower mag size makes it a little less efficient at suppressing the voteless. Another thing to mention is the longer reload pattern, which is another disadvantage for this weapon. It's a C for the squids. But moving on, we actually do have another weapon from the Liberator family that is quite noteworthy to look at, the AR-23A Liberator Carbine, which is very close to the base Liberator, only it has a faster fire rate and a higher recoil, at least until you modify this. And this one definitely wins the contest for being impacted the most by mods. Iron sights is not an option, despite definitely being a close range weapon, so it's not really going to matter which scope you choose. The vertical foregrip foregrip, though, really helps reduce that vertical recoil, and despite hurting your horizontal recoil a bit with the compensator, it brings your vertical recoil so far down that it actually feels kind of worth it, especially with how drastic that helps. To make the situation even better, this also can have a drum magazine, which basically means you can lay down super fast firing bullets like a laser and for a while. For the bugs, this has the advantage of being able to fire off shots very quickly, which ends up shredding the bugs in no time flat, so you can just keep it moving. But now with reduced recoil, you can have so much more range that you can feel confident to use this at. You used to need to pulse fire this significantly, and while I still do that, it doesn't need to be done quite as much. You also have the drum magazine, which you can use to dish out damage to multiple enemies before even needing to reload. This is also pretty good for the aggressive predator stalkers, as even though it doesn't have as much stagger force, you can pump those bullets in super fast, taking them down before they become a problem for you. I like this a lot, and so yeah, this gets a high A for the bugs. Now for the bots, this was once a struggle and a clear poop hater, but these modifications definitely make it more viable. Now with that being said, it's not perfect here. The fast fire rate I feel is not as necessary on this front unless you are facing berserkers. And while the recoil is lower, because you fire so fast, you can still feel it a little bit, especially as you are playing at range a lot. Now because this is only light armor penetrating, I just prefer a bit of slow firing guns where I can focus a little bit more on precision. You also face an issue here with the compensator, which adds horizontal recoil, making it harder to be precise at further away ranges. And if you go for something like the flash hider instead, you end up still having a good deal of vertical recoil, meaning this will still feel a little bit difficult to use on this front. It is a step up from where it was though. I will give it a C for the bots. Now, for the squids, this is amazing. Now that you can put that recoil super low, you can use this at way more ranges, and the super fast fire rate makes this take things down so quickly. The voteless, you can mow them down. The watchers get shredded. Overseers, you can take them out before they even think of taking out their shields. And speaking of shields, this takes them all down super quickly on the spaceships and the harvesters, which is really useful because you can keep it moving and follow it up with something else. Even the flesh mobs, this does take about 2 mags, but because you fire so fast, you actually have the time to dump it into them. In a lot of ways, this feels like you're taking out a stalwart, but in your primary slot. So this gets an S tier for me for the squids. But now we can officially move on from the Liberator family to the next assault rifle, the AR-61 Tenderizer, which is a very accurate, high-damaging assault rifle with a longer reload pattern, a modifiable fire rate, and less capacity. As far as modification attachments go, there isn't much that drastically changes this one, at least not for the better in my opinion. I like using the iron sights for increased ergonomics, the vertical foregrip for some better recoil, and the muzzle brake, which is already the default. You cannot change the capacity with this one, which is a major downside, and that can be a bummer. Versus the bugs, this does feel pretty good though, because this dishes out a lot of damage, making you feel powerful versus most things. And being able to switch to a higher RPM means you'll be able to dish out that high damage even faster, which comes much more in handy on the bug front to help you absolutely shred these guys. Although this is a great option, you will need to be careful as you may find you are out of ammo very quickly. And with the lower mag size here, it's something that is felt much more now that you can add drum magazines to a lot of these other guns. And even with the high damage, it can leave you really struggling versus the more aggressive enemies like the predator stalkers. Also, one weird thing that happens is even if you have your settings set to remember aiming function, this will default to the slower RPMs every time you respawn. So if you do want to use the faster RPMs, you will need to remember to switch it every time. Another drawback is the slow reload, but you can counter this if you reload a little bit early before you exhaust the whole mag. This feels good, but given some of the modifications you can do to other guns, I do feel like it's a little bit less special and not as ideal of a pick on this front. I will give it a B for the bugs. And versus the bots, this is decent. Despite only having light armor penetration, the accuracy and the low recoil on this thing, combined with the higher damage, leads to enemies falling quickly and nicely as long as you can get at their weak spots. The precision allows for headshotting or hitting weak spots on enemies, which can be a pretty good workaround since this doesn't have medium armor penetration. That said, spending that time lining your shots up a little bit more on weak spots can leave you more vulnerable versus the rest of the bots, so it's something to consider. I think as long as you have something with higher armor penetration, you can definitely take this out, but you will find yourself likely deprioritizing this weapon, which doesn't make this a higher tier item. It gets a B for the bots. For the squids, certainly the high damage on this is nice, and I like that it can one-tap the Voteless in the head. The fast RPM mode can be good too for laying down good damage for the Overseers and Watchers. The main drawback is that lower capacity, which makes you need to reload a lot, and that can definitely make it less ideal for a flesh mob, which is going to take multiple mags. I really do like this, but I don't find it to be as impactful as I would like. I'm going to give it a B for the squids. But now we have the BR-14 Adjudicator, a high damaging, medium armor penetrating assault rifle with a high recoil, at least until you mod it. And this is what I like to do. A reflex sight for slightly better ergonomics, a vertical foregrip to reduce that recoil, and in this case, I go all the way in with the compensator at least for the bugs. Unfortunately, along with the Tenderizer, this cannot have its capacity modified, making the gap quite a bit more stark versus a lot of these other assault rifles. Now versus the bugs, there are some noticeable improvements here, especially with that recoil reduction. What this does is it basically gives you a lot more confidence to use this at further ranges, and even without needing to crouch as much or use the engineering kit armor. The recoil reduction is pretty drastic. The higher damage on this thing also will just tear through bugs fast, and the medium armor penetration definitely comes in handy versus the Hive Guards and the Bile Spewers. The capacity is where this really falters, as there are no modifications for this, and so you end up needing to reload a lot, and that can be a struggle with some of the more aggressive enemies like the Stalkers, especially with the fact that this does not have much stagger. I do really love this assault rifle. It's a personal favorite of mine, and I do like that you can reduce the recoil a lot now, but that capacity can be a tough one. And so I'm going to give this a B for the bugs. Now versus the bots, I like this quite a bit. In the past, I would often recommend that you use this in the semi-auto firing mode as more of a marksman rifle, but now that you can reduce the recoil, it can actually serve you pretty well as an assault rifle too. And that makes this quite versatile. I typically modify this the same as with the bugs, although if you prefer to use this as a marksman rifle, you may want to trade in some of those recoil reducers for ergonomic enhancements. Regardless of how you like this though, the medium armor penetration plus the high damage is very welcome with this gun, and it really does well versus the Devastators. Whether you go for headshots or body shots, this will tear into them. This works awesomely for the Striders by ripping their legs or their crotches for a quick takedown, and generally just feels great versus most things on this front. I will give it an A for the bots. For the squids, this can be okay. The high damage on this makes it great for the horde, and the reduced recoil helps you get on target at those longer ranges. For the flesh mobs, this struggles as you basically need to go through 3 mags in order to take these guys down, and that can be a lot of reloading. The low capacity can be a bit of a problem here as you run out of bullets a lot and basically have to exhaust a full mag in order to take a spaceship shield down. Now, because this is medium armor penetrating, it can be great for Overseers, especially as you can go for the medium helmets. And I do like that this can take down the Harvesters if you can get a decent angle on them. It can be a decent pick. This also is one of the few assault rifles that has the ability to take out the Stingrays, although you do need to have a good angle on their underside, and I don't think it's realistic that you can do it in one swoop. Overall, this is good, but if you are wanting a medium armor penetrating assault rifle, I just happen to prefer the Liberator Penetrator with its higher capacity on this front, so I will give this a B for the squids. Next, coming in hot from the Force of Law Warbond is the AR-32 Pacifier, which is a medium armor assault rifle with stun rounds. It has low damage, a good deal of recoil, and for some reason, this is described as a large capacity weapon. In actuality, that's a bit of a poor choice of words, as the capacity is less than even the default Liberator. Now, as far as modifications go, I use the reflex sight, a vertical foregrip for vertical recoil reduction, and a flash hider to reduce the vertical recoil and keep the horizontal low. The compensator, I feel like, is a bit of overkill here, as the flash hider makes the recoil pretty manageable. Unfortunately though, there are no capacity mods for this apparent high capacity assault rifle. Now for the bugs, there is some good and some bad. The bad is, well, the damage is super low, so it feels like you are just tickling most enemies. And because the damage is low, you end up using your whole mag on one or very few enemies. The total mags also kind of feel low, so I ended up running out of ammo super fast. What's good on this though is the medium armor penetration, so you can get those hive guards with this pretty easily, and of course you also have the stun rounds, which can stop enemies dead in their tracks, and that can be especially good for the stalkers, although you do have to pump a couple bullets into them in order to ramp it up and let the stun take effect, so you do need to be kind of quick with these guys. That aspect where you need to ramp up your shots can make it kind of hard to use this for crowd control, as you need to try to get at least a few bullets on each enemy before moving to the next, unlike the concussive, which lets the stagger bullets kick in hard with each shot. Another plus though is this can stun a charger from the back, but also from the front if you hit him in its mouth, and that can be good to allow someone else to wreck him, or as I found, it can be a decent way to keep them from charging your sentry. The thing here with this though is there isn't really much reason to take this out over the pummeler SMG if you're looking to use stun rounds, as that has higher damage and capacity, especially with its ability to have a drum mag. Sure, the pummeler is light armor penetrating, but that still allows it to handle most of at least the most dangerous enemies on this front. The pacifier I feel like has potential, but I feel like they need to buff the damage and the capacity a little bit in order to make it a super solid choice. For now, I think this gets a C for the bugs. Now for the bots, I am actually of the opposite mind. This feels pretty good. The stun rounds being medium armor penetrating is huge for this front, as that means you don't need to go specifically for weak spots in order to stun the enemies. Sure, the damage is lower, but it feels pretty good when you pump bullets into these guys and they can't fight back. Devastators especially just sit there, as they can be shot from anywhere. Rocket Striders are frozen, as you can go for their crotch, and Berserkers are held back nicely. You can even stop a Hulk if you can get him from the back. And really the main downside here is I wish it had more capacity. I do like it on this front, so I will give it a low A for the bots. For the squids, this goes into the useless category. The bullets feel really weak even versus the voteless horde, and I'm just more interested in killing them fast than stunning these guys. The flesh mobs can get somewhat stunned at times, but not during their charge phase when you actually would want this to take effect. This high capacity assault rifle can't even take down a spaceship's shield in one mag, and in general, I feel pretty low on bullets all the time. I do like how this freezes overseers though, especially elevated ones, although the damage is still very low. And as this is medium armor penetrating, it can deal with the stingrays, but the damage is very weak, so expect to be at it for a while. Perhaps the best part of this is it does actually seem to stun a harvester when you hit them in the joints, so that can be nice, although taking down their shields and shield generators can be pretty hard with that low damage. Ultimately, I'm just not a fan, and I'm pretty sure they're gonna buff this and probably make this ranking obsolete, but for now, this is a poop hater for the squids. And so here we have our lists. This is where the assault rifles rank for the Terminids, here is where they rank for the automatons, and here is where they rank for the Illuminate. I think with the addition of mods, it can definitely help a lot of these weapons overcome a lot of their weaknesses, and I am certainly excited to see what kind of other mods get added to the future. But this is only one category of the primary weapons, and so we're going to need to see how these slot together with the rest. Stay tuned as I continue to level up and rank these weapons. In the meantime, check out my Helldivers tier list playlist, and thank you to my YouTube members for joining the Bowel Movement. But otherwise, so long, Pooper Troopers.